Hey guys, if you're wondering why my audio is going to be off a little bit, it's because when we were recording this episode, I was driving and didn't realize till afterwards how bad my audio would sound. So I apologize for that.
Jokes, trivia, and a lot of office quotes. These were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect TV podcast. But Professor Utonium accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction: Muppet references. Thus, the TV guys were born. Using their ultra superpowers, Matt, Brian, and whatever guests they came up with for that week have dedicated their lives to fighting boredom and the forces of bad television.
You know, even though that show's on my list, I didn't catch what you were doing until you said the word ingredients.
Yes, I figured. Hey everyone, welcome back to TV Guys, the show that, just like Brian's intelligence, can't get out of the 90s. I'm Matt.
I'm offended.
And we're here to talk about television shows. I told you you'd love that. I knew you'd love the joke.
So
I mean,
before
I'm going to say it about you and not someone who can't defend themselves.
That's fair. Okay, before we talk about what the topic of this week is, so I got a weird, bizarre podcast thing happened this week. So a podcast I used to listen to about maybe a year and a half ago. It was like winter 2021 into 2022. There was a Parks and Rec recap podcast hosted by Rob Lowe and one of the writers.
Okay.
And they went through the first 3 seasons, and they're like, we're going to take a break, and then we're going back. And then they just never came back. It's like, okay, I guess they abandoned it. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this week, like over a year later, season 4 popped up in my podcast feed. I'm like, what? And then I realized that instead of Rob Lowe's face, it's Jim O'Heir's face, who played Jerry from Parks and Rec. And I listened to it, and Rob Lowe is back again. But it's like Rob Lowe was basically saying, hey, the podcast is back, but I'm going to pass the reins over to Jim O'Heir. I'll be on for this one, but he's going to take it over. So, like, he's kind of just passing the baton. But it's just such a weird move to just abandon your podcast with no explanation, come back a year later and say, all right, bye. He's doing it now.
But to be fair, that is a very realistic Chris Jerry thing that could have happened.
Yeah, for sure.
Although, you know, Chris Traeger, even though as nice as he was, he still didn't have respect for Jerry, just like everyone else on the show.
No.
Not even Jerry has respect for Jerry.
No, I mean, he was always nice to Jerry. Like, he wasn't the one like Tom being like, Jerry sucks. But like, when push comes to shove, he's like, well, no, like, Jerry's still awful. But in a nice way.
So next week, we're talking about Better Call Saul, especially the final season. And here's a little sneak peek. Jerry pops up in that final season as a security guard in the future.
Yeah. Oh, they talk about that, actually. Because they say that earlier, like when I said then the first run of that Parks and Rec podcast, when Rob Lowe was hosting it, Jerry was on and he was being really cagey, like, oh, I'm working on a project. I can't really tell you what it is now. And now when they came back this week, he's like, oh yeah, that was Better Call Saul. I can say what it is now because it's out.
Nice.
Yeah.
And poor Jim O'Heir, or whatever his character was, had to be a Huskers fan past the 90s. Speaking of not making it past the 90s, gosh, they have not won a championship. The football team, Nebraska Cornhuskers, has not won since 1997. So, you know, like, they won in 94, in 95, and in 97. And then since then have sucked because their coach that was awesome in the 90s went on to be like a senator or representative or something, some sort of state government work.
Yeah.
But you're not here to hear about football. You're here to hear about TV shows.
But, you know, I bombard with Muppet references so much. I think this is a little thank you to our fans who might be football fans and not be, Muppet fans.
Yeah. I grew up in Nebraska. So I grew up in Nebraska in the 90s. So it was like Cornhuskers, everything. Like, that was a part of your culture. You had to be a Huskers fan, even if you didn't watch any football. So, like, I know these things just from being alive there.
I believe it. I believe it's one of those kind of towns.
I like to joke. I like to joke where, like, you know, like, so here's a deep cut Bible joke that, like, barely works, but it's just like, when I was preaching once, I was talking about being a Huskers fan, and I'm like, and I was born into the citizenship. I didn't have to buy it. And I'm like, that is like a joke that works for like 4 people. Like, there's like enough people that can catch both of those things. I love those
Yeah.
very specific niche jokes. They're fun.
That was
If
good.
you get them, of course. Anyway, speaking of getting stuff, we're going to get going on this episode talking about, if you've seen the title, you know we're talking about Cartoon Network TV shows. Now, there are still Cartoon Network shows that are on, but back in the 90s, this was like the counter programming to Nickelodeon, because Nickelodeon started this whole idea of programming on cable aimed at children. And
Yeah.
Cartoon Network was like, oh my gosh, that actually can work. Okay, well, let's do that. So then they started with these, like, the cartoons that they started with were ones that had been around for years. They started with like Looney Tunes and all those sort of stuff, but they're like, we need our own programming as well that is fresh and new. So then they came up with this slate of shows, and there's a lot of them that like still people you like talk about it like that show is a masterpiece, or if you talk about it, you're like, well, I watched it, but you know, that was just a thing that was there at the time.
Yeah. So, do you remember on Cartoon Network, all of my shows come from a specific block of shows they call the cartoons, which means great, clever naming. But do you remember the cartoon block?
I do remember the cartoon block. I remember like not the first time, but the first time I had heard it in a while, like since my childhood, and someone was like cartoon. And I'm like, wasn't that a show? I was like, no, it's a TV block. It was like TGIF, you know?
Yes. Yeah. It was cartoons.
We're triggering this memory that some of you guys are like, oh yeah, I forgot about that being way back there. So let's go ahead and start off. Now I don't know for sure all these shows I'm going to talk about, because I'm also going to talk about, we'll do this first, but then we'll also talk about the Adult Swim cartoons as well. But for the cartoon ones, so let's start. The first one I got here on the list is Ed, Edd n Eddy. I'm sure that was in that block, right?
Yep. It was. Absolutely. That was my favorite.
Yeah, that one was a lot of fun. Like, okay, there's three friends. They're all named Ed, or a version of it, but it's Ed, E-D, E-D-D, Ed, and then Eddie. And to this day, I still don't remember the difference between them. What was the one that looked
Ed
like he was a girl?
One. Oh, no, it wasn't that he looked like a girl. He always wore this hat and looked like black hair. And that was EDD. They called him Double D. I'm not sure how they got that passed. Like kids and calling him Double D. He was like the neurotic one, and then the short one, Eddie, was like the mischievous ringleader of the group. And tall Ed was the dumb one.
And of course, I mean, he's probably your favorite character. He was my favorite character, like the stupid, gangly guy that's sticking with them. He was a favorite of the three, right?
Yeah. That was Double D.
And I gotta qualify that because like he's the best of those three. Like he had the funniest lines, and like he had a sister too that like he hated, and like this big fighting relationship with. But actually, to me, I think one of the things, apart from their love of Jawbreakers, the one thing that whenever I think of Ed and Eddie, I always think of this is I can't remember what the kid's name was, but his best friend Plank. That is the thing that like triggers every time I think of Ed and Eddie.
Oh, that wasn't one of them. That was like the other one of the neighborhood kids. I forget which one it is, but he drew a face on a piece of wood and he called it best friend. Plank was awesome. It's Wilson.
So yeah, I'm just gonna kind of recap what you just said, because you're in and out for half of it. So when you're listening and editing, you'll be like, "What did I say?" So one of the neighbor kids had like this best friend, like this imaginary friend that he drew a face on, and he called it Plank. And like he could hear what Plank was saying, and no one else could, and they kind of just all went along with it. But it's like it was this existential crisis even that he would sometimes have of like Plank pressuring him to do things, or like he didn't want to hurt Plank's feelings or stuff like that. To me, that was the pinnacle of the show, was anything to do with Plank.
Yeah, for sure. There's also this one kid, Rolf, who was like the farmer hick kid. The only line I remember of his, and I don't know why it was so funny. He's like, "I smoked a ham." I don't know what that was in reference to, but he smoked him a ham.
You know, I just love having that from you with very little context. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
Yes, I know who you're talking about. Like looking it up, Rolf. Yeah. I don't remember much else about him, but
Yes.
like he was like
Hmm.
token foreign kid, you know.
And then the theme song was just all this whistling, and then again, Ed, Ed, Eddie.
It just sounded like he had a stroke just then.
You have anything else on Ed, Ed, and Eddie? Otherwise, we go on to the next one.
That's all I got. We can go on to the next one. What do you got?
Well, I'll go with what you mentioned in our opening, which was the Powerpuff Girls. And I still maintain. Okay, I remember I was working when I was working at Quick Trip on overnights. There was three girls who were working there, and we had like lengthy discussions. Okay, which one of you is the Blossom? Which one is the Buttercup? And which one is the Bubbles? Because there are three distinct personalities.
Yep.
And I have a theory that anytime there are three girls in any kind of group, you can figure out which one's the Blossom, the Bubbles, and the Buttercup. There's always one of each.
That's great. I loved Powerpuff Girls, but one thing that I noticed as an adult that I didn't think about as a kid is that looking at some of these cartoons, I really do feel like a lot of these cartoons were aimed at young boys. And I think someone at Cartoon Network was like, we need something aimed at girls. Now, Powerpuff Girls was fantastic. As a guy, I can say that. And like, I enjoyed Powerpuff Girls. But
Yeah.
I think also it was like, we need female inspired characters. And so they got these Powerpuff Girls, which was a great, like, these girls are great because they have very distinct personalities, like you said, and they're very unique. You know, like Bubbles
Yeah.
is like, as you can guess, bubbly and cheery and optimistic, and Buttercup is like, she's not like macabre like Wednesday Addams, but she's like tough and hardened and gritty, but she's also a little bit of a tomboy. And then you've got Blossom, who's
Yeah.
a bit more of like leader, Girl Scout, take charge. I wouldn't call her bossy, but she's definitely
Yeah.
like in charge. And so you do have those three that are all great personalities.
Bob is like the leader, the level-headed leader that keeps them in check.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. But this show like is elevated because they're all good leads, but this show is elevated by it has a fantastic supporting cast. And one of the big ones is the villains. There's like
Yes.
this rogues gallery
Oh
of
yeah.
villains. And Mojo Jojo to me is like the
Mhm.
pinnacle, which is why they brought
Oh,
him
he's
back.
the best.
He is for so many times.
There was Mojo Jojo. There was like that the Rocky Horror Picture Show as devil character who was kind of creepy, and
Yep.
then there
Him.
was a big Fuzzy Lumpkins. Wow,
Oh yeah.
I
That's a
there
name you
that
pulled
hiding in
out of
my brain.
nowhere.
Yeah, and I did no research. Why do I remember Fuzzy Lumpkins?
I don't know. I think you had Fuzzy Lumpkins as a teenager and had to miss 3 weeks of school.
We don't talk about that. And then there's the little mayor guy who was always like, there's something bad going on. Call the Powerpuff Girls. That's all I remember about him.
I remember there's one episode when Mojo Jojo he takes like he convinces some of their schoolmates to get some chemical X, and so they suddenly have powers, and then like they kind of do it like as an anti-drug message, where like they have powers for like 30 minutes, and then they wear off. He's like, "Do you want more powers? Yeah, we want more powers. Then you have to destroy the Powerpuff Girls." And so then because like they're addicts now, they fight these girls that are their classmates and nearly defeat them. And so then Mojo Jojo goes to the mayor and he's like, they've been defeated. I am now going to be mayor. And he's like, well, since I have no one to call, I guess you have the town. Like the mayor's just going to hand over the key. Like that's how inept he is. At least his secretary, you know, actually does stuff and is competent.
His secretary, who didn't have a face, who was always like shown from the neck down, and who always basically had giant cleavage, basically wrote in for the dads of the show.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, that's the one. Such a bizarre choice for a children's cartoon aimed at little girls.
Yeah, I wonder how that pitch meeting went. I think this character should be like that. Like what? Who let the pervert in? Like, guys, come on. We know it sells.
Yeah. We need, it's a show for little girls. We need boobs. Okay.
I guess. Whatever. See, that would have been a perfect segue, because I wanted to be like, speaking of boobs, Johnny Bravo But do we have more to say?
Johnny Bravo was on my list.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else to say, really.
Okay. All right. Johnny Bravo. Like, in an age that really frowns on what is called toxic masculinity, like, Johnny Bravo is a show that still holds a nice place in my heart. But I think what helps Johnny Bravo do well is the fact that for as, like, macho and as, like, girl crazy as he is, none of his schemes ever work. Like,
yes, exactly.
He's so cool in his own head, but, like, every girl just, like, rejects him. Like, no way, I'm not going for this. And I think that's how this show was able to catch on, is because you were excited to see how Johnny Bravo kept getting thwarted over and over and over in his pursuit of boobs, I guess.
Yeah, if you see a guy who's big head, doesn't care about anybody else, and he's constantly winning, that's annoying. That's not fun.
And also, you had his neighbor Susie, like this little girl that I wouldn't say they had an antagonistic relationship really, but that she would always succeed. Like, everything that she'd put her hands to, she would succeed. I remember one where I think Johnny had a lemonade stand. I know she had a lemonade stand, but I think Johnny did too for some reason. I don't know why an adult would, but whatever, it's a cartoon. And, like, he couldn't make any sales, but, like, she was just cleaning up, and then all of a sudden a limo pulls up and it's like the president, and he's like, "Excuse me, can you break a $1 million bill?" And she's like, "Well, yes, of course I can."
Yeah. The kind of joke that, like, obviously you're already in the cartoons, your sense of like suspense of disbelief is already low enough that you can just laugh at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But also Johnny's signature move, doing the monkey. That was when I definitely adapted doing the monkey into several dances at weddings when I was around the age that Johnny Bravo was on. It worked as well as you would think.
Also, Johnny Bravo was such an easy Halloween costume. All you needed was a black shirt, some hair gel, and sunglasses.
You say hair gel like his hair is easy to emulate. He had a freaking tidal wave on top of his head. You need something besides just hair gel, sir.
Okay, a lot of hair gel.
I think you need, like, a cardboard cutout shaped like a yellow
wave. That would
probably
be better. Yeah. So speaking of hair, the next show, unless do you have anything else on Johnny Bravo?
No, I'm good.
I'm going to go with a fellow ginger in Dexter's Lab.
There you go.
Is that on your list?
That is on my list.
Okay, first of all, I know it's a cartoon. We said you have to suspend your disbelief, but the electric bill alone should tip off his parents that something is going on. Like, how insane is that? And also, how did he get that dug out? Like, obviously he must have had an invention, sold it for like millions of dollars, sent his parents on vacation somehow, or went on a family vacation, and while they were gone, he must have paid an exorbitant amount to get the lab dug out. I mean, am I thinking about this too much?
No, like, you're absolutely right. Like, maybe you can add some of your insert, like, let's pretend he's Tony Stark-ish, where he created his own energy source that's renewable. Like, he was smart enough to do that. Maybe you can say that, but it's just like, the structural integrity of the house with that much underneath it, or what you said of, like, how does that come there in the first place? And you're right, laboratory is massive. It's like the size of a shopping mall under there.
Yeah, exactly. And with all of his inventions are thwarted by Dee Dee, how did he get the whole thing built without Dee Dee not getting it into the plans?
You guys didn't realize that this episode was crap all over Dexter's Laboratory episode, but that's what we're doing tonight. Also, I mean,
once you hear it, Dexter is voiced originally by Christine Cavanaugh, who is the original voice of Chucky, and you can definitely hear Chucky in there. He's like, "Dee Dee, get out of my laboratory!" I mean, I can't do the voice, but it's that inflection in Chucky's voice.
You can do the voice probably better than I could have, but someone needed to say that. Someone needed to say that line as we're talking about Dexter's Laboratory.
Yeah. Dexter was one of my favorites.
Apparently, Dee Dee came first Like there's the
Really?
inspiration for Dexter's Laboratory was based on seeing this ballerina and seeing like the height of this ballerina is like, we need a short, stocky character to offset this. And then like from there, I don't know the full story, but they must have developed the concept of what their relationship and the whole underground laboratory to begin with after that, to like start with ballerina and end up with this show. But Dee Dee is definitely like, you don't have a show without her. You need
both.
Exactly. And you need the foil for all of Dexter's stuff, because I wouldn't say he's super cocky, but he does have such a love for his inventions and a love for his science that he gets very focused. And so you do need someone to come along to be like, don't be so focused on this.
It's like Pinky and the Brain. It's a lot like Pinky and the Brain.
Yeah. True.
It's even like, here comes, in the first season of The Muppet Show, Muppet Labs was Bunsen without Beaker, and they're not as good.
You know, I did also like the mom and the dad, because they were like this weird, quirky, like they were in their own worlds. Like the fact how oblivious that they had to be, it makes sense for the characters that we ended up getting. But I just remember like they had some of this tongue-in-cheek humor that was just so hilarious with some of the things that they'd say.
Oh, for sure.
All right. I've got the last one that I can think of in this that I would want to talk about. Like there's some others like Cow and Chicken. I don't know if that's on your list, but like things like that.
I was gonna breeze past it. There's a cow, there's a chicken, and it was weird. We're done with Cow and Chicken.
It's Diet Ren and Stimpy's, I guess. I don't know.
That's a really good point. I never thought of it that way.
But the one that a lot of people still have this love for, and you can't talk about 90s or early 2000s Cartoon Network without this show, is Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Yep, that was the next one. Such a weird, like, acid trip of a show for children.
Even the art style, like this house in the middle of a purple wasteland, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, it's ridiculous. And you've got the three main characters of I think it's Eustace, Mabel,
Eustace, Muriel, and Courage.
Muriel. I didn't do any research either, and I got Eustace, and I got that it started with an M and ended with an L, so I was pretty close. Eustace, Muriel, and Courage. And Eustace he's selfish. He doesn't care about anything but himself. You got Muriel, who is very full-hearted and cares so much about Courage, and then you've got Courage, who sees the crazy things that happens and tries to help these two oblivious people and save them from every monster of the week that ends up happening. And some of these monsters are so freaking crazy.
Mm-hmm. It's bizarre. It's like the old trope of like, no one sees the monsters but Courage.
Yeah. he's like the reluctant hero to the extreme. And all of that did work. It worked as a show. And just those three simple characters, three simple dynamics, it really worked well. But it definitely, it had to be your type of show, because I know a lot of people who are like, what am I even watching?
Well, and also, okay, if we're going to get a little introspective on here, Matt, are you a pet guy? Do you have any pets?
I don't. I did as a kid. I had a lot of pets as a kid, but I don't as an adult.
Okay, you ever have a dog or a cat, and like they just like stare off or bark or just chase after nothing? And you're like, what are they seeing? Anyways, wait a minute. Am I Eustace in this situation?
Yeah, I have kids that do that, but I just figure it's all the sugar.
Like, I have a huge gash on my leg that's still healing because my cat, this is like a week ago, was on my lap, and then out of nowhere, heard or saw something, and is like leapt off my lap, and as he was like pushing himself off, his back claws ripped into my leg and got a huge, like, it was bleeding pretty hard. Like, how? What just happened here? Like, I'm injured by my cat because he was running after something.
It's funny though that like that is a really valid point, because there is like actual research and studies that try and correlate the sensitivity that like dogs and cats have to supernatural occurrences and paranormal things versus humans. And like I don't know how scientific these studies would be or could be, but there is a lot of research that you can find online. I don't know how accurate the research would be, but you can call it quote unquote research of people talking about that link or anecdotes. And so I'm sure that there's that idea functioning in this. I would be surprised if that wasn't part of it.
Well, I believe that dogs see things that we don't.
Yeah. And cats cause things that we don't. Evil cats.
Very true.
Why do you think Egyptians worshipped them?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I have never seen a live mouse in my place. I have seen 2 dead ones, and I have a cat. So thank you, Leo, because I don't want to have to deal with mice.
I've seen a number of I don't know if I could even call them documentaries, but they're videos about these cats that can sense when someone's about to die. And I'm like, they can sense it or they caused it. If you keep showing up at the scene of a crime, you're going to be the number one suspect for the police. Let's be honest.
That's true. And it's just like Courage to lead us into this weird, like, philosophical discussion. We're talking about cartoons. Well done, Courage. Well done.
I do have to say, I feel like Courage shot for an age bracket that was higher than what people expected. And I think that's why there was such a love for this show, is because it's one of those that can grow up with you and can make it into early adulthood. I didn't rewatch any Courage. I watched some of the other shows. Like I watched a couple Powerpuff Girls and stuff like that for this episode. But I didn't rewatch any Courage. But I would be surprised if I go back and watch Courage and be like, oh, this is worse than I remember. I would feel like it would be as good as I remember or potentially a little bit better.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't know if you had anything else before then, but I think Courage could have also probably worked on Adult Swim too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Adult Swim definitely was a lot more there's a lot more comedy in it. It was screwball, semi-adult comedy. That some of it was more inappropriate than others. But like let's start off with some of the more vanilla stuff, like Space Ghost Coast to Coast. And we've talked about that show before. This is one that I've been watching on my own spare time, even before we're going to talk about Cartoon Network shows. But Space Ghost Coast to Coast is one of those other absurd ideas because I've seen an actual interview that they've done that it's not like the Space Ghost, but it's like the footage that they use. And they take like a 15 to 20 minutes to interview one of these celebrities. And then after that, they write the show around the responses. And of course, they change the questions and they change what leads up to what these interviewers are saying. And it's actually really interesting because he will interview them as Space Ghost, but like the one that I saw was Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, and it was radically different what he was asking as Space Ghost versus what we saw in the episode.
Yeah. And that's just, it's one of those ones where if you're not paying attention, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. And I really enjoy, like, I enjoy Zorak. I enjoy Moltar. Oh. And like Space Ghost, though, he's just like that doofy, he doesn't quite get it. And he's a little bit of a straight man, but he's also like the guy trying to hold together a sinking ship. Because Moltar and Zorak don't like him. The guests are just oddballs and weird. Yeah. And he's like, I have to put this TV show on. And it works really well. The comedy that they strike is really funny.
You know, when I was in high school, back in the days of Kazaa and LimeWire, I don't know how or why, but I got a bunch of audio clips of Space Ghost, Zorak, and Brak. I put them in an album on I burned a CD of Space Ghost, Zorak, and Brak clips. And I remember, like, I would play them in the car when I'm with my mom, and she'd be like, what is this show you're watching?
Come on, Mom, you just don't understand. Well, that's true.
Yeah, it was the funniest thing. I probably still have them on my computer somewhere.
You sneak into your parents' house at night, and then you just, like, start a recording of it and, like, put it under their bed or whatever, and they wake up and they just start hearing their voices. Like, what is going on?
That would be funny. So staying on Adult Swim, did you ever watch Aqua Teen Hunger Force?
I loved Aqua Teen Hunger Force, man. Like Space Ghost is good, but Aqua Teen Hunger Force, it's still absurd, but it's at a next level to me. Just the one-liners are so funny.
And it's a little bit kind of like it's Always Sunny or an Arrested Development, where like they're all kind of terrible, but it works.
Yes, yeah. Like Meatwad is the only one that I'm like, take it or leave it. But like Fry's wanton disregard for anyone but himself is hilarious, and Frylock thinking he's better than everyone and like trying to hold things together is really funny, and like having to put up with Shake's stupidity is great. And then also, speaking of having to put up with stupidity, poor Carl next door just trying to live his life. We talked about like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we talked about grumpy characters. Carl should have been in that conversation.
Yeah, unless we do one called Eccentric Neighbors.
He absolutely could be. But I mean, you compare Carl with like Wilson from Home Improvement, and you've got vastly different people.
Well, yeah, I mean, then you also got Urkel and Kimmy Gibbler. I mean, that episode writes itself.
Man, I could spend a lot of this episode just talk about Aqua Teen Hunger Force like quotes, because in high school I would quote it all the time, and like I loved the cybernetic ghost of Christmas Past, and he's like explaining this whole story of how he came to be, and then Carl's just laying in bed listening. He's just like, hey, hang on, hold it. So you're Ghost of Christmas Future, right? That is correct. But I mean, you realize it's February. I will be back at Christmas tomorrow.
That was good. The only quote I remember is, for some reason, Fry was trying to kill Meatwad. He's trying to get him to like bite an electrical cord. Like, eat the spaghetti. This is spaghetti. How can you tell? And then I'll try to do a voice. And it's all black and it's coming out of the TV.
Do you remember the Broodwitch episode? That might be my favorite episode, the Broodwitch one.
No, remind me.
So I can't remember how they come across it, but Master Shake comes across, they fall into this sinkhole, and there's this Broodwitch, and it's this sandwich that is cursed, and if you eat it and if you finish it, you get killed. But like, it's so good that Shake can't stop eating it. So like, he'll take a bite, and then it'll transport him to like this other dimension of like this hellish landscape. And he doesn't die quite then because he's not finished with it. But like, he's eaten through the whole thing, and the Broodwitch can actually talk to him, and it's like trying to tempt him and all that. And then it finally gets to the end, and the Broodwitch is like, wait, you're still alive? He's like, yeah, I picked off all the sun-dried tomatoes. But those are the best part. Nah, I hate those. And so Broodwitch is trying to convince him to eat like the part that he picked off so that he'll die. It's such a funny episode.
This is another one of those shows. All of these shows on Adult Swim basically are like, who would watch this? But also, I want to watch this at the same time.
Yeah, the most normal show that I can think of is the one that I'll bring up next. But yeah, these two are just absurd concepts. But this next one is one that it wasn't my top, but what really sells it for me is H. John Benjamin, and that is the show called Home Movies. And Jonathan Katz.
I didn't watch this one.
This one is pretty good. So H. John Benjamin, like he's a side character.
I like him a lot.
He's these kids a soccer coach. So that, like, the story follows Brendan, who's like this filmmaker, which is why it's called Home Movies. And so then it had his friends Melissa and Ron, and actually Brendan that's his real name, the actor who played it and the showrunner. But it was like these three kids who Brendan was like this filmmaker, and they're like making these, as the name suggests, home movies. But what was really funny about it is like they got like comedians like H. John Benjamin and Jonathan Katz and Paula Poundstone as Brendan's mom. And they actually, like, for the first season, everything was improvised. They kind of had like these broad strokes of how the episode was going to go, and like all the dialogue was improvised. After the first season, they added a little bit more scripted stuff, but then still left room for improvisation. But it's like some of the funniest stuff, like I said, was out of H. John Benjamin's mouth or out of Jonathan Katz's mouth. And both of them were just really funny. And so, like, the show was fine for the three leads, but those two characters was what made me keep watching it.
I've loved H. John Benjamin and everything he does. He's one of those guys. He's such a dry sense of humor that just works. Like he could read like anything and it'd be entertaining.
Yeah, like as a soccer coach, he's like pretty abusive to like all the soccer players, and like but it's like they're all these kids, so he's like yelling at them like for doing kid stuff. Where he's like, "Don't be sitting on the ground. You can't do anything when you're sitting on the ground. Oh, there goes a soccer ball. You're gonna stand up." No, you're just gonna keep sitting there. I'm like, he's just imagining H. John Benjamin just creating this situation, and then the artists are like animating around it.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine that. That sounds like I want to go look that up now.
Yeah, it's worth watching a couple episodes. But again, like for me, it was always like when Aqua Teen Hunger Force came on, I was like, there it is. That's my show.
Yeah. All right, what else you got, Matt?
I've got one other one that you might have, and that is Robot Chicken.
Oh, I totally forgot about Robot Chicken. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm out, but yeah, I love Robot Chicken.
Yeah, Robot Chicken is Seth Green's baby. It is a really funny show where it's, it was almost ahead of its time because like right now we have like Vine, well, not any more Vines, but we had Vines, we have TikToks, we have all these short videos, and that's what Robot Chicken was. It was this collection of short gags, and the idea was it was someone channel surfing, flipping through channels, like making this chicken watch these channels pretty much. You see that in the title sequence. And so it was like going through all these channels, but it was like it would hit all these different parodies. It was like Saturday Night Live, but some jokes were only like 5-6 seconds. Some were like a minute and a half skits or whatever. And so it held your attention really well. That if there's like a gag that didn't land, well, it's on to the next one within 10 seconds or something like that. And so Robot Chicken did a lot more right than it did wrong. And it was a really funny show.
Some of them were longer though. Did you see the one where they did a whole like behind the music, like drugs thing about the Electric Man from the Muppets?
I remember vaguely something about that. But didn't they it wasn't the whole episode, but it's like they kept coming back to it.
Yeah, they can come, but they used the same Muppet action figures that I have in my house right now. I was like, hey, I have that one.
And then you looked at those ones and you're like, I can't believe you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Robot Chicken, it's creme de la creme to me is like the Star Wars episodes where it would dedicate a whole episode to Star Wars related gags. And so like there's a breakfast cereal, or maybe it wasn't a breakfast cereal, but it was something about like Admiral Akbar's like food, and he pops up, he's like, it's a snack. And like it was so good. Those
Star
whole
Wars,
episodes were funny.
Star Wars is such in the zeitgeist. It's kind of like easy, like going on easy mode to like have your show do a Star Wars parody and have people like it. It's only like I know the Family Guy Star Wars episode was one of the better ones. It's so easy. Like everyone knows the dynamics of Star Wars, and everyone will watch if you do a Star Wars thing. But where the good ones really stand out.
Yeah, they went very meta on one of the Family Guy Star Wars ones because Robot Chicken did the Star Wars episode first, and then Family Guy did a Star Wars episode like devoted to that. And Seth Green is one of the characters, is Chris on Family Guy.
I vaguely remember that. Yeah.
And so at the end of the episode, he's like, "Dad, isn't this just what Robot Chicken did?" He's like, "No, it's completely different, but they did it first. Yeah, but we did it better." Like going back and forth of the show's creators arguing who is better, Star Wars version. Yeah.
And then Adult Swim is also where I kind of got acquainted with both Family Guy and Futurama, because they would also show those on reruns.
They did. Yep. I'd left those off because both of those are Fox shows to begin with, but they
so did I, but
they were bought by
or the syndicated.
Yes, there you go. Yep.
No words.
I didn't hit on this because it was a show that wasn't my top one, but we can just throw out. There's another show called Venture Brothers, and the best part of that show is Patrick Warburton's character, who is Brock Sampson. He's like, it's Patrick Warburton's voice on this super serious, indestructible bodyguard of a man, and it's just like, for all the silliness that's going on, you've got like this extremely super serious character in Brock Sampson, voiced by the dry humor of Patrick Warburton. And that was the one part of that show to me that worked. The rest of it was like, whatever. Yeah. But I liked his character.
And Patrick Warburton is one of the guys, like, he is voicing in everything.
Yeah. He's great. I mean,
Yeah.
he won't beat Kronk, though, from Emperor's New Groove.
Best poison.
Right, the poison.
How many voices am I doing on this podcast?
A lot. That's what we're doing. That's what we're going with. You're doing a lot.
I'm committing or getting committed.
Yeah, it's probably closer to that.
Yeah.
Well, that is it for this episode. We're gonna jump into trivia. Brian, what was last week's trivia?
As you may have noticed by the quality shift, we forgot what the trivia was. Anyways, last week we asked how many of the original Power Rangers from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers were going to be in the 30th anniversary special Once and Always on Netflix. The correct answer is 6. David Yost as Billy, Walter Jones as Zach, Catherine Sutherland as Kat, Steve Cardenas as Rocky, Johnny Young Bosch as Adam, and Karen Ashley as Aisha all returned. They did, however, use old audio clips of the 4 remaining Rangers who did not return: Austin St. John, Jason David Frank, Amy Jo Johnson, and the late Twee Trang.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right. This week's trivia, we talked about a lot of shows, but we talked about Powerpuff Girls. And one of the characters that Brian mentioned, one of the villains, is like that devil robot claw tutu wearer. And his name is Him. But this character is based on... he's not based, but he's... Yeah, I'll say based. He's based on a character from another piece of media. And so what piece of media was this character based off of?
I have a guess after we're done.
I highly doubt it's wrong, because this is one of those deep cut ones too.
Okay.
But you can guess. Anyway, make sure you're here for next week. I love Better Call Saul. I'm so excited to talk about it. And it's going to be hard for me just to talk about only the 6th season, because I'm rewatching the show and like there's so much stuff. I'm like, I want to talk about this stuff. It's so good.
Is it the 6th season, or are we doing the show as a whole?
Oh, we can do the show as a whole because I'm watching all of it. So
okay, I'm not, but I watched it recently enough, and like I have a lot to say about the show. It is fantastic. And might be controversial and blasphemous, but I like it better than Breaking Bad.
I agree. I don't feel like that's as controversial, but I definitely think that there's a lot of people that can understand the merits of it, because the Breaking Bad, like, they were learning stuff, and Better Call Saul, they kind of had perfected some of the stuff that they were learning.
Yeah.
And so they're starting at an advanced position. So it's a little hard. You got to give a little bit of credit to Breaking Bad's learning curve there. But anyway, make sure you're here for that. Until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And we're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.